everyone, and welcome again to the annual European Health Tech CEO Forum. And it's pretty fitting, actually, if you think about it. We're having a panel about digital pharma and discovery, but in the health tech side of the week. And I think that's really telling, because technology, artificial intelligence, high performance computing is really impacting the pharma industry, both in terms of discovery and the exciting new field of digital therapeutics. So to bring this all together, I'm joined by Regina Hodits, Managing Partner of Wellington Partners, and I'll ask Regina to introduce herself in a second, as well as 5 wonderful panelists who will also go around and introduce themselves. But a couple of words on myself. Guy Spiegelman. I lead up the work that Amazon Web Services does with healthcare and life science startups across Europe, Middle East, and Africa. In the past, I was an investor and I went through a number of healthcare and life science startups myself. Anyway, Regina, take it away.
Excellent. Thank you very much, guys. So I'm a managing partner with Wellington Partners. We're an investor who, until about 4 or 5 years ago, have only invested in bricks and mortar life science stuff. So in pills that you can swallow, antibodies you can inject, heart valves you can replace, or actually some kind of tests that you can actually do on yourselves. And as most other people in our industry, we probably have been late to coming to the digital side. But for the last 5 years, we've actually kind of come out of the closet with our digital strategy, and which is basically saying, we don't believe that there will be a drug, a device, or diagnostic that will actually survive without a digital angle to it. And that actually also exemplifies itself in the investments that we have done. One of them is actually Sidekick, and maybe I can also hand it over to Tryggvi to take it away from here.
Thank you, Regina. Happy to to introduce myself. So I'm Tryggvi, a medical doctor, a co-founder and CEO of Sidekick. We at Sidekick, we partner with global pharma companies, including Pfizer and Bayer, and also work with major health insurers to develop and distribute both digital care and digital therapeutic programs, working across quite a wide range of therapeutic areas, including inflammation, immunology, oncology, always with a view of improving patient outcomes, improving treatment adherence, and reducing cost of care. And really excited to join you here today, and looking forward to discussions.
And Martin, would you care to introduce yourself, please?
Wonderful. I'm Martin Bittner, and I'm one of the founders and the CEO of Arctoris. We're an Oxford-based company that develops and operates a fully automated laboratory for drug discovery, whereas my own background is very much in clinical medicine, oncology, then cancer research. So kind of transition from clinical to research and now into the entrepreneurial role.
Thanks very much, Martin. And Jan?
Hi, my name is Jan Lichtenberg, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of InSphero. We are a Swiss-based phenomics company, so we've developed a drug discovery and drug safety platform that kind of operates at the boundary between biology, where we are creating 3D disease models based on human or iPSCs, engineering for culturing these cells and reading them out, and then data science to understand and derive conclusions from the data set that we are generating.
Thanks very much. Alex?
Hi, I'm Alex Chavrenkov. I am the founder and CEO of a company called Insilico Medicine. We have developed the end-to-end drug discovery and development pipeline that can identify a target for a disease and take it all the way into preclinical and clinical. And we've just done that with novel molecules. And we collaborate with Arctoris, so love to see Martin here. So congrats.
Great, thank you very much. And Jeremy, joining us from the United States.
Welcome from the US, I guess. Jeremy Sohn, I'm Global Head of Digital Business Development, Partnerships, and Innovation at Novartis. Novartis, hopefully everyone is aware, but we're one of the top leading pharmaceutical companies globally. My role at Novartis is particularly to help drive our technology and innovation efforts across the companies, so globally and cross-divisionally, and it's a pleasure to be here.
Great. Regina, do you want to ask the first question?
Yeah, I can do that. I think probably the question that we have is a little bit kind of saying, we are sitting here on the health tech side, as we said, of the spectrum of the SACS conference. So what I would find interesting is to hear from you guys, define a little bit how you actually see how are your different business models really fitting into where we are in the spectrum of developing novel drugs, developing novel approaches to actually help patients going forward, and how really an AI and high performance computing can actually help with that for those of you who are actually dealing with such business models, or actually how your approach is actually revolutionizing the drug side a little bit with Tryggvi. And I would really leave this open to whoever wants to take this first. This is your chance to actually do a little bit of promotion.
Maybe I'm jumping right in here. So I think that what we can witness right now is the drug discovery ecosystem as a whole is undergoing quite a massive shift, where technologies, in particular AI and automation, are influencing everything from analyzing biological data, finding new targets, generating new compounds, recruiting participants for clinical trials. We can see how technology is transforming every single part of the drug discovery process and drug discovery funnel, which I think is an incredibly exciting time to be in. And what, in our opinion, at Arctoris is one of the key characteristics of this trend is that what powers all of these decisions is the right data at the right time. And this is kind of why we built a robotic laboratory, because automation is the only way to achieve the level of precision, accuracy, reproducibility that can then be the basis and form the basis for the best possible decision making, be it AI driven or not. And that is kind of one of the things that I know kind of Alex has a lot of experience in.
So Alex, take it away. What's different now about identifying targets that actually have a real use?
Well, I think first of all, if we are to define AI, I want to make a kind of small disclaimer. I would refer to deep learning specifically, and that technology essentially entered the world and the world of biopharma around 2013, 2014. So if you were before that, you were technically not deep learning. If you are significantly after that, you do not have a lot of results to show yet, because even if you can race very quickly from target discovery to some very minimal validation, with AI, you still need to do a lot of work experimentally, and those experiments take a lot of time, so sometimes years. So what I see in the industry is that, of course, the industry is booming. So right now you see hundreds, if not thousands, of companies being formed. A lot of work is done at the academic level. And actually, lots of credible scientific advances are happening pretty much across the globe. And also, China is a huge trend as well. And now we see a lot of validation experiments. So previously, people were referring to deep learning for drug discovery as hype, and you could very quickly discard any claim by the AI company that did something cool. But now you see many traces of evidence, and very solid evidence with lots of experimental data showing that now you can tangibly use deep learning to identify targets in chronic diseases, for example. So there are some pharmaceutical companies where at least 5 to 10% of their targets came from our engine, new targets that went into early stage R&D, and sometimes in the very novel therapeutic areas as well. And of course, now many startups, they got substantial amount of funding. So now we don't have problems raising. So suddenly it's the other way around. So it's very difficult to find a good company to invest in. I'm now kind of switching hats, and I'm investing now in others. It's a very good time, because now you can experiment and see where things work better. And you can actually take some of the projects further yourself to generate more data. For example, I'm going to go clinical this year myself, and now we are inventing a lot of new tools for clinical trials. So you have the ability to invent. You got the resources, and you don't need to partner with anybody. You can do it yourself, unless you need to partner with companies like Arctoris, that actually in robotics is the same thing. So I've got a lot of robotics companies, but only like 1 or 2 got it to work to some extent.
Okay.
And yeah, So
excellent. No, I think this is great because I think it shows that really AI and machine learning have a component that can be used to actually make things better. And I think in that line, Jan, this is also probably, I was a bit surprised, honestly, to see you on the digital panel, because to me, this is pretty much like real world stuff. So help me.
Exactly. So, but I think this is what's maybe a little bit counterintuitive if you think about artificial intelligence, deep learning, and automation. It is actually taking us closer to the patient and not further away. And I think that's what's so exciting for us. When we started InSphero 10 years ago, it was all about putting the patient again back into the center of drug discovery, right? We've actually kind of moved away from the patient. We look at biochemical screenings, we look at animal testing to establish efficacy and safety of drugs. But this is not the patient, right? And our goal was to bring the patient, the diseased patient, and not just one, but that whole diversity of the patient population back into the center of drug discovery activities. And that's why we started InSphero, and we created the biology that allowed us to do this in the lab, to create disease models from patient cells, from healthy cells, move them or drive them into a specific disease state so that we can clearly understand how is the disease biology working, what are the hallmarks of the disease, and then as a next step, we got a lot of instrumentation on board that allowed us to understand what's happening inside these microorgans, looking into high content imaging, into next-gen sequencing. We're now looking at single cell sequencing, but that's where we had a problem because we've generated so substantial data sets that it was very, very difficult to understand and derive information that allowed us to take decisions from there. And I think that's where especially deep learning comes in. I'm totally with Alex here. We are currently focusing primarily on image analysis to understand fibrosis and other effects in the tissues. And it allows us to really extract an amount of data and an amount of information from this data that helps us to take the right decisions. And we're not even yet talking about bringing natural language processing into the picture to also understand what's happening in the literature and correlate this with the findings that we have. So our interest is really to bridge actual real world biology with digital tools that help us to extract information from these vast amount of data that we're generating.
Mm-hmm. And now, Tryggvi, you take us to a completely new dimension, because while we have still been kind of sitting at an augmentation of reality, now you take us actually to an kind of, in a way, virtual reality, but I think it brings together a lot of the elements that we've heard before. So what's special about Sidekick?
Absolutely, and I think it's a nice continuation of what's been said. I mean, you invest all of these resources and do this incredible work in drug discovery. And eventually, once you bring that drug to the market, if you can encapsulate that drug, traditional therapeutic, with a digital therapeutic that can augment that therapeutic's effectiveness, improving patient outcomes, treatment adherence, collecting real-world data, the benefit to our pharma partners is quite clear. I mean, looking more fine-grained, I mean, improving patient outcomes, of course, means improved competitive standing, improved market access and pricing. Improved treatment adherence is pretty clear. The access to real-world data that we can then collect with the digital therapeutic or digital care program as the drug hits the market is quite remarkable. And in some cases, it becomes also a standalone revenue stream for the pharma partner in terms of direct reimbursement. So that's, and also speaking as a clinician, I'm so excited about the development that we're seeing in how we are combining traditional with digital therapeutics. That's really exciting to me.
Excellent. So, Jeremy, you've got an embarrassment of riches here of new approaches that can really revolutionize everything from the very front end of target identification to kind of automation along the development process, to maybe putting the whole pharma model back on its head by actually putting the patient and the treatment process in the center and maybe the drugs at the sideline. So what do you make out of all of that?
I think what you're seeing here is a great example of all the areas where we are focused. You know, what you heard, maybe to even just summarize it from our perspective is look, to accomplish many of these things, particularly around the data science piece, whether it's, you know, artificial intelligence, machine learning, et cetera, we need to get our data in order. And in many cases, we need to not only get our data in order, we need to actually explore new data sets that haven't really been well captured, haven't been well managed, et cetera. In fact, again, what we're seeing is that there's really, it's not just even the molecular data sets, but it's even, bench level data sets. So where are we actually, and how do we actually capture, what's happening in our chemistry labs, et cetera. Then, of course, it's then pulling that into our processes and thinking about, and quite candidly, where we sort of debate internally, is it really about finding new target identification, or is it about better target validation? There are many people inside Novartis who would argue that we have a richness, that people have always talked about this 10,000, we start the year with 10,000 ideas or assets and we whittle it down. So it's fair to say is we don't have a problem really around target identification. It's really about this validation is what do we need to do in order to figure out which ones do we really want to put our bets on. And I think, again, there's a richness of opportunity and some of the tremendous work that Alex and the Insilico team, as an example, have been doing are good examples of where there's good progress there. And of course, again, as we heard from Jan and Tryggvi, that what we're doing as we start capturing more data from the real world evidence side is what we, at the end of the day, these drugs need to sit, and we need to understand where do we need to treat people? How are people being treated? How can we change that paradigm such that we could actually get best-in-class drugs to patients earlier? I was sitting on a call earlier today for our annual franchise strategy reviews, and the statistic that came up is that still only 10% of patients are actually treated on what one might consider as being best-in-class medication for that therapeutic area. 10%.
Wow.
Right? That's not to probably mention the fact that there's probably roughly 50 to 70% of patients in any therapeutic area who are undiagnosed or unaware that they even have that particular problem. So we're looking at not only treating patients and getting the right drugs to patients earlier, but also getting the right drugs, but also to getting it earlier, to making sure that, if we can be more aggressive and increase the speed in which we actually make them available, we believe that we'll be doing right by patients and actually right by the system. And again, of course, digital medicines from Sidekick and others, we do believe in a holistic experience. And the question again is how do you introduce these in ways that are meaningful and acceptable to to consumers, to payers, to providers? And I think there's still work to be done there. I think quite candidly is that we're still trying to figure out how do we get that done in an efficient way, and that's compounded globally, of course.
So I want to pick up on that, Jeremy, and maybe ask the panelists. It's tremendously exciting. If we're faster time to target, perhaps clinical development, Alex was referring to, we can crunch that time as well, and then we're changing the whole how it all works in the real world. But before we get too carried away and excited, perhaps we can identify here what are some of the blockers, what are some of the challenges that you're facing, what are the things you'd like to wave a magic wand and say, I wish this was solved so that we could move faster. Does someone want to jump in and say, yes, I have something that, come and solve my problem, and maybe someone out there can. So who wants to jump in?
I can do it any time if you like. So I think that one of the biggest problems is the complexity of human biology. So if we were to make it simple somehow, it would be great. But unfortunately, one of the reasons why pharma is having troubles, one of the reasons why we have troubles is that just the biology is so complex, and we're still scratching the surface. So when people talk about what data are you using, or we have more data than you do, it's actually quite weird, because most of the data has not been generated even at this point in time. That's why you need companies like Arctoris and many others that can generate the data that currently does not exist. People are not measuring it at all. Okay. Just to understand biology better. I recently, just yesterday, interviewed a really brilliant scientist, Jason Schelzer, currently at Cold Spring Harbor, he published a really cool paper in 2019 that was pretty much overlooked about many many molecules in clinical trials today, they progress because of the off-target effects, not because of the due to on-target effects. And actually what's extremely surprising is that the paper, the first two authors, senior authors, they were undergraduates. So nobody even tried to go into that area and validate many of the targets that are currently in phase 2, phase 3 clinical trials. So it's just, again, the complexity of human biology and the level of validation that people are doing before getting into clinical trials is, so biology is complex. People are not doing enough work to generate enough data to support the hypothesis. So I think that just the complexity of human biology is a problem. So it will take us time anyway, right? So not all problems are going to be solved quickly.
Absolutely, but given the complexity of human biology, there must be other things we can do to remove some of these blockers and challenges. Does, I mean, Jan, what are you presented quite a holistic picture of taking imaging data, literature data. Where are you frustrated? Where do you think you need some more solutions?
So a topic where I think we could bring the field forward by more interacting and joining forces is really data aggregation. I think there are a lot of data silos that we have in the industry, either between nonprofit organizations within the companies. If we could, especially in pre-competitive areas, create platforms where we can collect, curate, and then use and reuse that information, I think that would be extremely helpful. So one area that I'm thinking of clearly is drug safety, which is still a major concern that blocks us in getting drugs to the market faster. Late stage attrition is still very expensive. Alex mentioned off-target effects, which kind of fall into that same category, right? And there are a couple of groups that have really generated excellent genomics, transcriptomics data that allows to better assess potential liabilities with new drug candidates at really early stages. If we take that, if we expand on that to understand whether a drug has a therapeutic window that is useful, so between, let's say, at what concentrations do we see efficacy at, from what concentration on do we see unacceptable side effects? I think if we could manage to take that information earlier into our consideration, I think we could definitely streamline the drug discovery, drug development process, and we could focus on the winning drugs earlier on. And I think that is something that's currently not really happening due to a lack of coordination, due to a lack of willingness to cooperate within the industry. And it's something that we should definitely change for the greater good.
So here you're talking about a process element. Here it's not human biology, which is going to take the time and effort of many brilliant academics and the industry. But here you're saying, hey, can we get together? Can we actually agree on a certain sort of pre-competitive data sets, data infrastructures to benefit everyone? Okay, so that's one area that I think is a challenge that we can perhaps be addressed. Jeremy, from your perspective, working both within the large corporation, but also having a very a window onto the startup scene, where do you think some of the key challenges are that are holding back the industry in the discovery phase? And I'll get you soon with regard to therapeutics.
Let me, if it's okay, let me actually first comment. I think the last year or so has been extraordinarily difficult for so many. At the same time, I think what COVID has done in terms of sort of mobilizing the global community, the global research community, the global life sciences community, the global healthcare community, in ways that I think everyone rose to, well, just about everyone, I think everyone rose to the occasion. And what we saw actually around this notion, for example, around data and data sharing is that consortiums came together of people who were willing, entire health systems, entire countries were willing to put their data, make it publicly available so that everyone really across the spectrum could take advantage of that, whether it was for research purposes or whether it was for safety purposes or whether it was for understanding, how do we prevent, additional virality. So the capabilities in many respects have, the technology is there, thankfully. In large part, actually, the great work that companies like Amazon and others have been laying that foundation over the last couple of years. The motivation didn't exist, but I think we now have a path. We've got a model. If we could leverage that model, the willingness of this global community to come together and begin to tackle not just COVID, but other disease areas, like that would be amazing. We're beginning, I think, to sort of see some examples of that. Of course, finding the right balance to be able to protect intellectual property and people's commercial interests, of course, we need to do that. But my personal sense is, I'm not speaking from a Novartis perspective, but my personal sense is that everyone can win in that kind of collaborative experience. In terms of some of the other challenges that we've talked about, let me shift, because we could talk about any one of these topics, but let me talk a little bit about some of the areas that sort of, at the point of care, the consumer experience. I think we do still need to think about how do we create patient/consumer level experiences that aren't about your disease. They're not disease facing. They put the disease behind, and we talk a lot about almost subconscious experiences. So if and when I need to do something, great, remind me. But otherwise, I don't want to think about myself as being a cancer patient or a multiple sclerosis patient or a heart failure patient. I want to think of myself as Jeremy Sohn, who's got a loving wife and 3 kids and whatever, and an happy employee of Novartis, et cetera. That's who I want to think of myself as, right? And if I need to happen to take some medication in the morning or go to a doctor on Tuesday or whatever it is, remind me in those moments, but don't necessarily lead with those experiences. And so I think we still have a lot to do around just figuring out how do we create those experiences in ways that are meaningful, that reduce burden, and that actually lead to the expected set of actions. And we're still not there. Again, we have a lot to do. Just think about ourselves. We don't really like to think about, brushing our teeth in the morning or going to the doctor or going to the dentist. Like, those are things that we do because we have to, not because we really want to.
But yeah,
maybe, Guy, if I may, I think this just begs for an answer from Tryggvi. I think on both accounts, on actually managing the data that comes out of a population, and also on people being people and not wanting to be patients.
Yeah, I love that comment, Jeremy. I could not agree more. People are people, not patients. We do focus groups with our users, and that's the red thread of kind of the feedback. They don't want symptom trackers. They don't want to be reminded of their disease. They want support, which of course addresses the disease when needed. And so that's when we talk about kind of some of the blockers for scaling digital solutions in the industry. On one hand, it's I'd say maybe the first wave of solutions weren't adequately sophisticated. This is incredibly complex. We are creating clinical treatments, digital medicine, but at the same time, just like you said, these are consumer tech products. So it has to have that consumer tech grade quality as well to ensure engagement and retention. It has to be enjoyable to use the product, just like any consumer application is. So you can't do just one. You have to do both of those. And so yes, you have to have those more sophisticated solutions. We're seeing that now with what we could call the second wave of solutions, much more sophisticated, much broader, evidence-based, clinically validated, tailored to different patient populations, age groups, and scalable across regions of the market. So that's one of the maybe blockers in terms of kind of the past few years. I'd say one of the great things is we see in our view, patients are absolutely ready. So patient adoption is I think getting there. They are ahead of the curve in many ways, really. And over the past 20 years, patients have become so much more actively involved in their treatment and just assume and expect to be actively involved, and technology allows that. So I'd say that's there. Pharma have been, sure, yeah.
I want to ask you, if the patients are there, we know in terms of the digital front door and the consumer experience, they're expecting, the customer experience has come such a long way in the industry. Why not in healthcare? And we're seeing massive differences across the world now with, like, for example, vaccine rollouts. I have the privilege of being in Israel, right? So where we've seen, the digital combined with the physical infrastructure, and we're there, and there's wide acceptance. But what about the regulators? Are they catching up in time for you? Are they blocking, or are they enabling?
No, I'd say regulators have really been doing a fantastic job over the past 2-3 years. Such important infrastructure changes that have been occurring, all of them so much needed to have that very rigorous infrastructure in terms of data privacy, security, all of that. And that's another kind of part of the sophistication of the solutions to make sure that all of that is up to par. So to me, that's all more or less getting there. We are by necessity a complex industry. There are so many stakeholders, and so yes, you have pharma. They have been early adopters in many aspects, but then payers. What we're seeing in the past just months, actually, payers kind of galloping forward in terms of acceptability and scaling these solutions, and really exciting things happening with our company there. And providers, I'd say, maybe most complex in terms of training the whole workforce, and having worked as a clinician in a big hospital, I mean, I know it takes ages to teach new practices and train for new tools. But that's coming there, and COVID definitely accelerated a trend that was already occurring in terms of clinicians more and more adopting digital tools as well.
Can I jump in here? I think I agree, actually, Tryggvi's comment. I think that the regulators have actually done a really nice job, particularly over the last 2 years, in terms of picking up their speed and openness to sort of accept technology. At the same time, and this is not a criticism as much as I think a joint challenge for all of us in the community, I think we need to still rethink this model, because it's still not happening fast enough. Right. There are many questions that are holding back what I would say is this dramatic change in innovation for the betterment of society and patients. Whether it's, how do we drive towards synthetic control arms in more meaningful ways, causal learning models, in actually randomizing controlled studies. How do we adopt decentralized clinical trials in ways that truly aren't just around the edges, but are actually, within our core submission, studies. These are areas that, typically it takes about 10 years for our regulatory guidance to sort of adopt. And quite candidly, in Moore's law, when every 2 years technology is changing, having a 10-year cycle is kind of irrelevant, right? We end up with guidelines that reinforce what was true 10, 15 years ago. So it's not happening fast enough. We are responsible for not pushing hard enough, but I think our regulatory organizations globally could also help us in rethinking the model, right? And it can't be led by consortiums alone, because the consortiums they're just not as effective as I think we'd all like them to be. They're great, don't get me wrong. They're fabulous and they have an important role, but again, 7 to 10 year cycles to drive technology change and business model change. It's just not fast enough for what we want to achieve.
Yeah, I mean, Jeremy, maybe I might just jump in here more as a panelist than a moderator. I think what we've seen on the venture side is if we actually invest in such novel technologies that kind of help with kind of speeding up clinical trials, or even if we actually help to generate real world data that could actually influence drug development going forward, goes also a little bit to what we're doing at Sidekick. Sidekick has all of the Icelandic population in their backyard. They can actually do nice little proof of concept trials, but then at some point, it would also take adoption within the larger organizations. So in my view, if I had a wish, it's not so much like a concern, but if you see how collaborative the industry has been in the COVID field, if with regards to the digital adoption, we could also kind of get more open doors to kind of say the development organizations, if there was a little bit of a push also, if I may play that back, to say, if I actually develop a new drug, have I really thought about all of the different technologies that from Arctoris to from Martin to Jan, these guys can offer? Have I thought about all of the ways how I could actually save myself doing clinical trials by having people run these kind of virtual trials? And have I really thought about how can I actually have my front door organized and my real world evidence and my additional effects that could come from having a companion digital component to my drug? Have I really thought about all of that? My wish would be that we could actually install that feeling from the top, from the pharma company as well, because with the advent of data, the regulators will have an easier time.
Where do you see the right point in starting to think about this in the drug discovery process? That's something that I'd be interested to learn from Jeremy and Tryggvi. So when should we think about what kind of digital support do we need to make the treatment paradigm that we're developing more effective? So one of the areas where we are very active in as a drug discoverer is in metabolic diseases for the liver, NASH and FLD, but also type 2 diabetes, highly multifactorial diseases that combine certain preconditions, but they are very lifestyle related, right? They are very related to diet, to exercise, and other aspects that I think can be affected a lot by digital therapies. But we're working a lot in combination therapy, where we are looking at different compounds that we can combine to make the treatment more effective, but not very much on how can the digital part play a role here. So is that something that we actually need to do from day one when we start the discovery project?
You've actually opened up my favorite topic, but Jeremy, please start, and then I'm happy to add on.
Yeah, I mean, it's 1,000% the right question. I could give you again my view and some of the work that we're doing in Novartis, although I don't want to present this as Novartis's view. I would argue that we need to be doing this. In traditional product teams at large pharma companies have really taken more of a science-driven approach. And so when you think about the product really is a series of an arc of a scientific set of experiments that drive towards basically the first and foremost approval, and then sort of your market access related activities. But the product isn't defined in the context of it's a product to get you through regulatory approval, right? And then maybe reimbursement. It's not actually the product in the context of, well, what does the healthcare experience look like, both from the provider and the and the patient? And so increasingly, we are expanding what it means to be a product team, right? And thinking about the technology side, the data side, the commercial components. And you can't wait until the product is a year or 2 years from being launched, or even worse, at the time of launch, to begin to think about, in NASH as an example, if you're treating early NASH, how do you find those patients? Early NASH, people are not getting biopsies. So do you just walk around and say, well, the comorbidities for NASH are obesity and diabetes, and so you have a high probability of being an early NASH patient? And you just I mean, there's no way of scientifically objectively doing that unless we sort of begin to say, hey, if you're going to be in the early NASH space, we need an acceptable diagnostic or biomarker that basically we could use. And we need to do that work 3, 4, 5 years in advance, or accelerate the regulatory process so it doesn't take 5 years, because half the time we're not doing things because it just doesn't make any sense because we missed that window. And to your point as well around NASH and treatment, you can't ignore diet as a function of NASH treatment. And so, combination drugs are great, but what about combination with a digital therapeutic that focuses on diet?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And
just
sorry,
to the point of early NASH is probably also looking at masses of electronic medical record data going back. You can probably find sort of algo or digital markers that can help with that. But I'm very wary of time here. And I think Martin has to jump off a little bit early. So I want to just direct a question to you, and I'm going to change the little bit of the nature of the discussion. One of the things that fascinates me is that I feel like the industry in Europe is a few years behind the United States, and you've set up your really advanced startup over here in Europe. What are some of why do you think that in Silicon Valley, in Kendall Square in Boston, we have dozens, if not hundreds, of early stage companies facilitating the lab of the future? And why are we so behind over here on this side of the pond?
I think it's a rather complex question. I think there's kind of multiple answers to that. So first of all, one thing which I believe many people in the industry are not entirely familiar with is that in terms of laboratory automation, actually Europe is considered one of the centers globally.
Okay.
In terms of laboratory automation, kind of the US kind of is on a par with Europe and with Japan. Japan has a very different approach to lab automation, which is quite fascinating, using humanoid robots, whereas North America and Europe rely more on liquid handling working stations. Anyway, so we have those three areas, I would say, being more or less on a par when it comes to automation work. However, what Europe has in terms of key strengths is an amazing density of pharma companies plus excellent academic universities that, of course, a bit more spread out compared to everything being in Boston, Cambridge, or everything being in the Bay Area. But if you look at, for example, Oxford, Cambridge, AstraZeneca, GSK, Imperial, all of those are within a 2-hour radius. That is an enormous amount of talent that can be tapped into. And the same thing if you go to Basel, one city, 2 of the largest and most successful biopharmaceutical corporations right there, right in front of you. So I think there is indeed kind of quite a few things happening in Europe where I think the inventiveness as well as the level of biotech innovation happening, I would say is probably on a par. What I think one of the major issues is access to capital. And that is kind of an entirely different story. And that is also one of the reasons why we see so many American funds opening up shop in Europe. You know, this is kind of why so many American funds suddenly have a London office and have a Berlin office and do all these things, because they can see that there is a very, very rich environment of biotech assets, of potential new drug delivery systems, of digital therapeutics, which in comparison to the US are often undervalued and underpriced. So I would say that there is kind of increasing awareness that it is worth looking not only at the US, but also at Europe.
Okay, does anyone have a view here of course, from our view, and then maybe Regina, you threw out a challenge here to the capital side of the table. But we see a very big difference in the amount of startups in the platform space developing their own compared in Europe, and also a big difference, you know, obviously coming from AWS in cloud usage is more reticence over here, which by definition allows for less cooperation and collaboration, which was called for before by Jan. So just interesting to see if anyone else has perspective here. Jan?
Yeah, we don't like this Europe bashing. We believe anyway that we are innovation-wise, we're probably the best innovators here. Yeah, we have a little bit less capital and we lack this little stock market over there. We're aware of all of that. But hey, you're sitting here in such a rich ecosystem of opportunities, and you have to make the most of the opportunities over here. And I think the most of the opportunities we can actually make over here is by using the diligent kind of nature of being able to actually develop products and services up to a level where they can really be productized. And I think it's in Europe, if you actually look back over the last decades, we have really excelled on actually building products over here. We may have not yet got exactly to the same level of shareholder value without tapping into the stock market in the US, but we can do that right now. So I actually think on the digital side, probably we've been hampered by European data rules. We've been hampered by people being careful about their data going forward. On the other hand, we've now seen a whole global world see the power of actually sharing data. And you mentioned Israel before, and I think it is mind-boggling to see how fast Israel or Iceland, where Tryggvi comes from, Singapore, how they can actually tackle health challenges of the future. And I think we will see more of that. And with the power unleashed, I think it's absolutely the right time to invest in Europe. There's great opportunities, and I think all of the companies that are on this panel, and there are many more out there, and I'm sure Jeremy is also aware of that. You have also a scouting group out in Basel, also, I guess, for a good reason. And so in my view, we have a lot to be said for here, for example, with regards to reimbursement, with regards to approval. If you think about the CE approval for class 1, class 2 devices, where it's clearly regulated what they should be doing and should not be doing. And with regards to, for example, reimbursement schemes, both in France and in Germany, when it comes now more to the digital therapeutic side. Sorry, guys, I'm not exactly sure whether there are any particular regulatory advantages of being in Europe on the SA side, but there we definitively have a strong position.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think just to echo some of the last comments, so reimbursement in Germany as an example, and now in France as well, is for particularly for novel medical devices is actually, I think, leading is a leading model for how early stage companies can begin to test and evaluate and get commercial traction before sort of the wider reimbursement from the larger payers comes in, and that model is beginning to shift into the U.S. In a welcoming way, actually. So I would argue that there are a couple of areas for sure where the United States has a lot to learn from Europe. And as was already said, I think there are clearly a size factor in the U.S., but we've been super impressed, continue to be super impressed. Look at the companies right here, and the vast majority of them are European based. And so there's a clear benefits from not necessarily putting our blinders on and just saying, hey, we're only going to focus in one geography.
So, but I would love to follow up on Jan's question. This is one of the things that I'm really enthusiastic about, and things that we are seeing big shifts in the industry now in terms of kind of when is the right stage to partner between traditional and digital therapeutics. When we started working with pharma companies some 3 years ago, it was mostly with a commercial and a brand team. So you had a drug on the market, and you saw that by supporting that, augmenting that with a digital, you could gain a lot of value. But what's happening now is that pharma and digital therapeutics are connecting much earlier in the pipeline. So instead of working with brand and commercial units, working with the BD&L and the R&D units, going into joint phase 3 trials is something that our company and others in the industry are doing. And so that's where you can really unlock the full value of kind of the best of both worlds. And just like we talked about in NASH, I mean, it's a typical disease where you can see, I mean, we have RCT showing that we reduce weight and reduce A1C, and you combine that with what the molecules and the traditional therapeutics can do. And if you do that already at the phase 3 trial stage, there is so much potential that you can unlock in that. And that's one of the shifts that really are most exciting in my part of the industry, I'd say.
Yeah, would also be interesting, Alex. I mean, what the guys like Tryggvi and other people on the digital therapeutic side see is that actually, for example, influencing anxiety in inflammatory diseases is really reducing anxiety, in inflammatory diseases is really leading to biomarkers being influenced that actually then have a real therapeutic outcome as well, so that they really can become part of a therapy. And that is especially in also processes that are really long-term inflammatory processes that could even lead up to NASH. These things do become important. Are there things that we can actually build into the early development process as well? And I mean, the question is anybody paying you for having more knowledge in the future? So if you kind of were to encompass some of the data that comes back from kind of collecting more digital insight in how drugs work, and also what InSphero is doing by getting the right treatment to the right patients. Is there a back kind of loop into what you are doing? Possible?
So sure, actually, so here it's, I will have to speak from kind of two perspectives because I wear several hats, and one of those hats is I'm a chief longevity officer of a company called Deep Longevity, which we spun out of Insilico, and it has a range of apps that predict your biological age on multiple levels. So if you go to a website called young.ai, you will see that a lot of people are using that particular tool to track their biological age. And they are submitting all kinds of data. So from blood tests and pictures and surveys and psychological surveys to their drug regimens, to diet, etc. And some of them are trying to reduce this biological age. So actually, one of the ways to get people diagnosed early and to identify those early biomarkers of liver disease, including NASH, because NASH is such a multifaceted disease. There are many kind of angles: metabolic angle, fibrotic angle, and just general kind of liver degradation and aging in general. It has many similarities with NASH. So you can now diagnose NASH and other forms of liver disease through those continuous longitudinal data monitoring. Very often, the data types that give you clues about the presence of disease are not obvious. So very often people are just not measuring those, and they are not present in the UK Biobank or NHANES or Framingham or any other longitudinal study. So you really need to collect those yourself. That's why I'm saying that the human biology turns out to be much more complex. And there is a feedback loop. So for example, now we spun off that company out of Insilico, and now we're likely to partner because I'm designing a clinical study for another fibrotic disease, a phase 1 study, and we will accompany that study with a digital therapeutic provided by my other company, which will just provide the tracking first, but we will be able to at least see what other data types can be responsive to the therapeutic that we've developed at the early preclinical. Okay. And from the other hat, from Insilico hat, so we have a pretty cool system. It's called Insilico. We predict the outcomes of clinical trials from preclinical data. And last year, 1st of April, we published a preprint predicting actually Novartis's clinical trials for the entire year. Okay. And now you can go to ResearchGate and see how we did. Yeah,
Alex, you're a whole ecosystem unto yourself, which is always wonderful to speak to you. And but just the last question, and very quickly, you know, and I'm going to ask this, but you can choose which side to answer, either the platform play developing the new target or the digital therapeutic. When are we going to see a blockbuster from one of these workflows?
Well, I'm happy to start. I mean, I think in the digital therapeutic space, we are just about to see a growing number of blockbusters. There's so much activity going on. It's so much more serious than it was a few years ago. So it's so much more closer strategic partnerships with pharma companies in those early stages. So I mean, over the coming years, it is becoming, and it's going to become absolutely standard that with any drug, you'll have a digital companion, and in some cases, standalone digital therapeutics as well. So there's no doubt this is the future, and it's coming fast in the next 1, 2, 3 years. Absolutely.
So since I'm an investor with Tryggvi, I have to put him on the spot. Tryggvi, when are we going to have the first blockbuster coming out of Sidekick?
Yeah.
Well, there will be a few announcements this year that just keep your ears open for.
Okay.
Sounds good.
And Jan,
I think on the platform side, there are already products on the market that have been basically developed using phenomics approaches, right? So this, but before the term was really coined and used like that. But I think from our pipeline and from the projects that we supported partnerships, we are probably looking at 2 to 3 years from now. But this is not a singularity, but we'll see that whole paradigm of developing drugs is shifting more and more in that direction because it simply makes sense.
And Jeremy, do you want to tie it up for us?
I just think that we're on the cusp. I think the last couple of years that we've really seen an amazing inflection point for technology, data, and innovation. 3 years ago, our CEO came in and said, hey, we are no longer just a science company. We are a science company driven by technology and data. That was a radical change to say we're really 3 pillars that all come together that need to work synergistically together, whether it's applied to AI or machine, or real world evidence or patient experiences. They're all need to come together. And it's amazing to see what's happening. I'm excited for the next 5 years. So.
Okay, well, great. Well, thank you very much, everyone.